What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. The United States has frozen military aid to Ukraine, prompting an emergency summit of European Union leaders in Brussels. At the heart of it all stands President Zelensky, who traveled with a somber urgency, aware that his nation's vulnerabilities to Russian pressure might now even worsen. European leaders listened with a genuine feeling of concern, realizing that any unraveling of Ukraine's defenses could ripple across the continent in unprecedented and unpredictable ways. The old days of leaning on the American might as a near-constant security guarantee suddenly felt outdated. Although Europe has long revered in its unity, this crisis exposes how unstable that alliance can be when the United States steps back. This is a perfect example of true colors being revealed during stressful times. And it will show who is a genuine partner, who is there leeching the support, and how well the alliance can solve the problems together. As cameras rolled, the European Union tried to present a confident front. But behind the podiums, the diplomats traded anxious glances, worrying about budget shortfalls and entrenched political rifts. The question at the core of every conversation seemed pretty clear. Can Europe summon the resolve to become its own mainstay, or will the situation reveal deeper problems inside the system? President Zelensky made his appeals in straightforward terms, reminding his European counterparts that time is hardly on Ukrainian side. Russia, emboldened by perceived wavering in Western unity, might exploit any delays in delivering arms or support. Who knows, because this might be their last opportunity to capture as much land as possible in order to improve their negotiating positions before the ceasefire takes place. And sure, the European Union's leaders pledged that Ukraine would not be abandoned, yet a new reality is taking shape. If Washington stands down indefinitely, it's up to Europe now to step up. There is simply no strong nation left in the world which is interested in protecting Ukraine. Throughout the summit, the phrase "coalition of the willing" became a subtle refrain, suggesting that if the entire bloc cannot align swiftly, perhaps a smaller core of determined states will have to patch up the breaches. And though the public statements were filled with confidence, the underlying tension was unmistakable. So today, guys, let's explore how the suspension of American aid is shaking the foundations of Europe's security paradigm, why the European Union now talks of bigger budgets and nuclear guarantees, where a coalition of the willing might come into play, and whether these dramatic gestures will amount to anything tangible for Ukraine. When word spread that President Trump's administration had frozen military support and crucial intelligence sharing with Ukraine, European politicians felt the ground shift beneath them. For decades, the continent had grown accustomed to the idea of Uncle Sam as a steadfast partner in safeguarding Europe's eastern edge. It was not just about the money either. American reconnaissance, logistical expertise, and advanced weaponry functioned like a safety net. It was very comforting and often taken for granted. Once that net started to get packed, Europe's sense of security immediately wobbled. The response in Brussels was equal parts alarm and determination. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, framed the moment as a crossroads, calling it a watershed that forces the European Union to decide its own destiny. President Emmanuel Macron, known for his bold stances, underscored the likelihood that Russia would interpret any Western indecisiveness as an invitation to broaden its ambitions. Yet, aside those conference rooms, some leaders recalled how reliant they had been on Washington in previous crises, like the Balkans conflict in the 1990s to recent missions in the Middle East. President Zelensky observed it all with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. He welcomed Europe's sudden surge of attention, but pressed for more than promises. This was, after all, a matter of immediate survival for his people. The time for bureaucracy and delay is over, and if the assistance is to be provided, it should come as soon as possible. The sense of a severed transatlantic bond haunted many participants, reminding them that if America truly pivots away, Europe alone must deter Russia. Whether it's ready for the responsibility remains an open question. We have seen many Western military equipment and vehicles along Ukrainian front lines, but it was only a couple here and a dozen there. The people of Ukraine are grateful for any assistance they can get, don't get me wrong. But America alone did provide much bigger support than any single European country. Another thing is that America is an individual assistant, so all the bureaucracy and paperwork is done within a single country. Imagine now ramping up the support, trying to navigate and make arrangements between several countries all at once at the same time. It will be tough, but it is not impossible. In the corridors of power, the initial response to Washington's withdrawal was instinctive. Throw as much money as possible at the problem and do it fast, right now. One European minister suggested that if the United States will not finance Ukraine's fight, maybe the European Union can. But the scale of Ukraine's needs stretches far beyond just signed checks worth of billions of dollars. Modernizing armed forces requires training, logistical infrastructure, and advanced technology. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, responding to fears of a forced settlement, declared that Ukraine must never be cornered into accepting an unjust ceasefire. To make that stance credible, Europe has to back it with real capabilities. Because most nations as one believe that a ceasefire will only be temporary, giving Putin more time to work on his mistakes, rebuild the military, and invade again. Hungary, however, expressed doubts about increasing defense spending so dramatically, citing their own economic problems at home. Despite that reluctance, Luxembourg's Prime Minister argued that the European Union cannot pick and choose which crises to fund if it wants to be taken seriously as a global power. And I mean, rightfully so. The feeling of security comes from the realization that in case something bad happens, your allies will be there to protect you. Imagine if police only selectively chose which crimes to investigate and which to ignore. Most likely only small and easy wrongdoings will be prosecuted. The rest, complicated stuff, will never be solved. Will this give you a sense of safety if you lived in a community like that, knowing that the criminals can kill you, take your belongings, and just leave the neighborhood, because the police will be too lazy to investigate? Beyond the politics, the sheer magnitude of military upgrades loomed also large. Procurement for fighter jets and missile defense systems involves time-consuming negotiations and specialized expertise. Nations that have long neglected their militaries face now steep learning curves in everything from drone warfare to cyber defense. The cost does not simply vanish once budgets are approved. Supply chains must also be coordinated, personnel must be trained, and alliances must maintain cohesion to avoid duplication or rivalry. And then there is also public opinion. Some nations do not feel moved enough about the idea of funneling massive sums into a stale war. It was easier to convince the citizens of one country, America, that Ukraine needs their help, and now try to do it for 27 members of the European Union. But still, the summit's underlying message was very unambiguous. If the alliance wants to preserve stability, it has to invest like never before. Otherwise, Russia's sense of impunity may grow only further. As the debate raged over defense spending, another conversation took shape inside meetings. The United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer brought up a plan for a coalition of the willing, conjuring echoes from earlier global engagements but with a fresh twist. This time, the idea was to rally a cluster of nations prepared to intervene in Ukraine, whether through direct peacekeeping, arms transfers, or post-war support and reconstruction, regardless of whether the entire European Union could unify behind such efforts. Bless you. Starmer even pointed to countries from outside Europe, like Australia, that have voiced moral backing for Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict, and also to European Union nations like Ireland, which might send troops under very particular conditions. Critics see this approach as a fragmentation of European Union authority, potentially undermining Brussels' usual decision-making structures. But proponents argue there is very little time for the detailed negotiations that often characterize EU foreign policy. Poland's leadership, for example, insisted that Europe must summon the will to push back against Russia decisively, or else watch from the sidelines as Ukraine is being exhausted and destroyed by prolonged conflict. That sense of urgency is what fuels the coalition of the willing. Without it, some fear that pragmatic but slow-moving bureaucracies might hamstring Europe's ability to respond fast enough. Supporters also believe such a coalition could also motivate smaller nations reluctant to commit under European Union flag and standards, allowing them to coordinate targeted contributions in line with their own resources. While many details remain vague and unfinished, the underlying logic is pretty simple. Waiting for 27 member states to achieve consensus might be a luxury Ukraine cannot afford right now. Perhaps the summit's most startling pivot came from President Macron, who floated the idea of extending France's nuclear deterrent to other European Union members. For some Eastern European nations, especially those bordering with Russia, this sounded like a long overdue reassurance. After all, a broader nuclear umbrella could, in theory, prevent Moscow from escalating. Yet, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz hesitated, emphasizing NATO's existing infrastructure and the complexities of nuclear policy within a multinational alliance. Was Europe truly prepared to reorganize its defense posture around French warheads, and how would that affect relations with NATO? Well, these are some very good questions, and we might not hear the answers for some time. Because any talk of nuclear sharing triggers deep-rooted anxieties about sovereignty, strategic doctrines, and the moral ramifications. Macron tried to frame his proposal as part of a bigger push to prove Europe can stand on its own. But the debate, unfortunately, only highlighted how far the alliance remains from a unified stance on ultimate deterrence. Meanwhile, the summit's participants wrestled with more immediate issues, such as how swiftly can they channel new military hardware to Ukraine, and who pays for it all. Hungary voiced skepticism about collective financing, viewing it as a slippery slope that could expand European Union influence over national budgets. Wealthier states, however, worry that refusing to pool resources will hamper the Union's capacity to act quickly on pressing threats. All the while, Russia loomed large in everyone's calculations. Foreign Minister of Russia Sergei Lavrov dismissed the summit's outcomes as irrelevant, warning that any movement of European peacekeepers in Ukraine towards Russian positions might be considered as an act of hostility. This stance highlighted the dilemma in Brussels. A policy too soft risks inviting continued Russian aggression, while a policy too bold could provoke multinational confrontation. That balancing fragile act defined the closing hours of the summit, as leaders tried to resolve how far they should go without sparking a broader conflict. Well, that's it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support my work, you can become a channel member. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are resolve they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in